started. So I welcome to Public History Graduate School 101, the first session of NCPH's first ever grad fair. Thank you all for joining us today and being a part of this. This session will be a roundtable, and we will have lots of time for questions from our students that are in attendance today. You can share your questions for our presenters at any time using the chat window in Zoom or using the Q&A feature. And this session is being recorded, and we will share this out with you once it's been processed. We'll post it in the FeedLoop app and circulate it with you that way. It's now my pleasure to introduce our speakers for this session. Dr. Cardona is an associate professor of history and graduate advisor at East Texas A&M, where she teaches courses on travel, exploration and discovery, cartography, and transatlantic history. After receiving her PhD from the University of Texas at Arlington, she worked as a map curator for the Texas General Land Office. At East Texas AMU, she is the coordinator for the graduate certificate and minor in public history and teaches the Introduction to Public History class, as well as an upcoming material culture course. Next, we have Dr. Leah Glazer, who is a professor of history at Central Connecticut State University, where she coordinates the undergraduate minor in public history and the public history MA program. And she teaches historic preservation, late 19th and early 20th century American history, as well as the American West. She holds a PhD and MA in history from Arizona State University, and her interests include public history and sustainability, stemming from her work with the Salt River Project, the Bureau of Reclamation, and the National Park Service. She's also co-founder of NCPH's Environmental Sustainability Committee. Dr. Gretchen Sullivan-Soren is Director and Distinguished Service Professor at the Cooperstown Graduate Program, a training program for museum curators, educators, and directors that's part of the SUNY Oneonta system. She holds a BA degree from Rutgers University in American Studies, an MA in Museum Studies from the Cooperstown Graduate Program, and a PhD from the University at Albany. Dr. Soren writes and lectures frequently on museum practice, diversity and inclusion, and African American history. She is also senior historian with Steeplechase Films on the documentary film Driving While Black, which aired nationwide on PBS. Dr. Will Stoudemeyer, our next presenter, is an associate professor of history at the University of Nebraska at Kearney, where he directs the undergraduate minor in public history and the online public history MA program. He holds a PhD in history with distinction from Arizona State University. While at ASU, he worked as a contract historian for the National Park Service on a variety of cultural resource management projects in the American Southwest. Prior to joining the faculty at UNK, he served for 5 years as director of the university's G.W. Frank Museum of History and Culture. His research interests include the history of early museums and preservation activities in the American West, with a special emphasis on the role these efforts played in the larger settler colonial project. And last, but certainly not least, is our facilitator for today, Eleanor Shippen. Eleanor is a Lois F. McNeil Fellow in her second year of the Winter Program in American Material Culture, a master's program at the University of Delaware in the Winter Museum. Eleanor is also the marketing engagement intern for Delaware 250, the state's semi-quincentennial commission, a role that directly relates her research on public memory and commemorative ephemera. Eleanor holds a BA in anthropology with distinction and a specialization in archaeology from the University of Victoria. After graduating in 2023, she held several positions at heritage institutions in Nashville, Tennessee. Eleanor has served on NCPH's new professional and student committee since 2023 and became co-chair of the committee last year. Thank you to all of our presenters for joining us today, and I will turn it over to you, Eleanor.
All right, thank you so much, Stephanie. I think we are just going to go ahead and jump into some of the questions that we had drafted in preparation for this session. So the first question that we have up and it's going to be one that I'm sure we'll have a lot to talk about, is what is the difference between public history and quote unquote regular history? And I'll open the floor to anyone who wants to answer that.
I'll start us off. Somebody's got to speak first. So there are entire treatises written on this. So any answer we provide in a few minutes is going to be inevitably somewhat insufficient, and I'm sure my colleagues can poke holes in what I say here as a result. But public history is first and foremost oriented differently towards that public audience. The public part of history is really important, of course, right? Public historians are writing and doing work with and for public audiences, in kind of a nutshell there. And unlike a lot of our more academically oriented colleagues, our more kind of quote unquote traditional colleagues, we're often doing work on projects where we don't necessarily always get to set the agenda and kind of set the questions that are guiding our research. We're working with communities to decide what those questions are, what those research goals and objectives are, and really working in collaboration with the publics that we serve, whereas my more academic colleagues get to decide what the research topics are, whether or not anybody cares about them at all. So that's one of my fundamental defining lines.
Yeah, I would agree with most of that, Will. And I always usually say that the public historian is more facilitator than a sage on the stage, and that you really have to enjoy the process. You can't be stuck on like, oh, well, I'm not interested in that. You really just have to enjoy the historical process. And sorry, my link guy.
No, it's quite all right. I was actually going to say that, when I introduce it to my students, I always say it's the history outside of the classroom a lot of times, because most public history takes place outside of a traditional classroom, where I think a lot of people feel that history happens in a classroom, or at least history education, history learning. Whereas public historians, we do it both, right? A lot of us do it both in and out of academia, in and out of the classroom. But for the general ideas, yeah, it's public. I mean, it's history outside of the classroom, monuments and museums and historical homes and national parks and all of these things that I know, at least for a lot of my history students, when they're taking the intro to public history, they're in the classroom and they're like, I don't know, I needed an elective. And what does this mean? Or I think I want to teach, but I'm not sure. And it's a great opportunity for students to really take historical knowledge and historical methodology and get it out there outside of the classroom.
And I would add, we were actually having a discussion about this in class this week. We're talking about voices and whose history are you telling, whose stories are you telling, and whose voices are you listening to. And I think for public historians, it's really important to listen to the voices of the people in the community and let people tell their own stories. And that often makes it harder, because there are lots of contested stories within communities. Communities are not monolithic, and so as we tend to characterize groups as monolithic groups, and they're not. So how do we tell these stories? If you're an academic, what's the right word? It's not. We're all academic historians, but if you are not a public history historian, you don't really have to go out into the field. You don't really have to ask people to tell their own stories. You can rely totally on documents, totally on evidence that doesn't bring you out of the library. Academic historians, not. I've talked to people who say, I just went into the library and looked at the archive, and that's where I got my book. But it didn't involve talking to anybody or working with anybody.
I
Yeah, I
will
saw your hand. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I will just add that I am seeing, increasingly academic historians are increasingly borrowing a lot from public historians in terms of oral history and material culture, and even I think it was in the AHA newsletter, even uh, participating in public dialogue and writing toward the moment, which, is another aspect of public history, is it's producing history that has relevance beyond the academy, in my mind. And so, I think that those lines are getting fuzzier because academic historian is adopting a lot of kind of what was kind of within the realm of public historians. But the audience thing and where we practice is still pretty distinctive.
All right, thank you. I think that is a great transition into our next question. We were talking about some of the work that public historians do, but what kinds of programs are common for public history and how might those be different?
I'll speak from, so I got my graduate degree in the West, in Arizona. And then I moved here to Connecticut and to New England. And in New England, we are the only public history program in Connecticut, and there's other public history programs in New England, but they're fairly new. Because at least in the Northeast and on the East Coast, public history programs tend to be pretty siloed into museum studies, historic preservation, archives, and archaeology, and they don't meet. And so public history programs I see as more of a big umbrella, but all of those other kinds of programs are still kind of part of that. But in the East particular, those are really siloed kind of programs. So if you just want to work in museums and you don't care whether they're history or not, then maybe museum studies is for you, for example.
Well, I would, as one of those siloed programs in the East, I would say that what we do is public history, and we focus on museums, but there are many skills that you learn when you're in a museum studies program that I call transferable skills. And what we find is that our students go out and work in a variety of areas. One of the things that I had the opportunity to do not long ago was to work on a documentary film. And I found that my area of expertise, which is museum exhibition, was a very valuable tool in working on documentary film. So I think depending on how you decide to select a program, those siloed, I really do take a little bit of issue with the silos, because I think a lot of the programs give you those transferable skills that can be used in a variety of public history venues.
And I'll say beyond that, in terms of structure, you're looking at a bunch of different options out there. You're going to find programs that have a master's directly in public history. You're going to find programs that have a concentration in public history that is underneath a larger MA in history program. Sometimes the differences there are pretty small, but sometimes those differences are fairly significant. A program that's fully dedicated to public history might require you to take far more courses in public history specifically, whereas a program underneath the larger history MA, you might be taking more kind of traditional history courses with a few public history courses tacked on to give you that kind of concentration. You also will find certificate programs out there that can be added on to an existing MA program. Yep, exactly. I wanted to call that out. We got certificate programs out there that can be, you know, an additive to an existing MA that you might be pursuing in, say, history itself, and are usually not as many courses. A lot of certificates are going to be in the 15 to 21 credit range, whereas a full master's program will be 30 to 36 credits. So that's something to consider too. And then I'll say, you know, where we're located, we're the only public history program in the state of Nebraska. We're a fairly generalist program. We don't have a particular specialty in, say, museums or historic preservation like some programs have. And then we're also fully online. So that's an option too. A lot of brick and mortar programs, and then there's a very small handful of online programs. So lots of options out there.
Yeah, and I'll pipe in as the certificate option. So here at East Texas A&M, we have a traditional master's in history, and then the option of either doing a minor in public history or a standalone certificate. So we do have a lot of our master's students who come and then take intro to public history as an elective, and then get them in, right? Hook them in to public history. And then I do have people who take it as a standalone certificate as well, people who are librarians or archivists or maybe have a degree in English and are either looking for a career change or interested in kind of broadening their knowledge. And we do have a broad selection of classes for the certificate as well.
And I would say as you're looking at programs, that many programs are going to have their course requirements online with specific information about the various classes that are required. So if all of this is kind of confusing between kind of concentrations versus minors versus certificate, don't worry so much about that. Pay attention to the courses that are actually being offered in a particular program and see if those classes appeal to what you're interested in and kind of what you consider to be your needs and the things you would like to really focus in on and study as you're moving through a graduate program. There's pros and cons to each of these different structures. There's not necessarily one that's better than the other.
And I'll just add a couple more paths that are, kind of part of public history, depending on the program, which includes digital history and gaming, and also cultural resource management, and that, and kind of pulls in historic archaeology and things like that.
All right. Thank you, everyone. I was just trying to make sure all our questions looked good. I think going off a little bit of what we've talked about, since Will was kind of hinting that it can be a lot to sort through all of the different components of different programs, what recommendations do you have for navigating a public history program once you've been admitted? And then what skills or behaviors do you think help students succeed in the program that they've selected?
When my students come in, we usually have started to do certain orientation with them to talk to them about time management, obviously. That's a really big one, and the differences between graduate school and undergraduate, and the expectations that they're not sitting, for the most part, the occasional lecture, but mostly these are kind of seminar type classes or hands-on type classes, depending on the class, that they are expected to participate. The other things that I really push is getting out there, taking any opportunity that comes their way, whether I offer it to them or they see something, whether that's going to a conference, doing a workshop, professional development, a part-time position. Take any opportunity that in remotely appeals to you while you're in graduate school, so you can start getting that hands-on professional experience.
So I'd like to add on to that too. One of the things I talk about with my students is think about kind of who you are, right? Are you an introvert or an extrovert? I always think in public history, there's like front of the house, back of the house, if you think about kind of in restaurant terms. Are you someone who wants to be out in public and speaking with people? Do you want to give the historic home tours? Do you want to be public facing, or are you more like, no, I don't want to talk to people. I enjoy kind of the more quiet back end and side of things. And so definitely think about that when you're in your program. My job, my public history job before I came back to academia, I was hired because they needed an extrovert in the archives, because they needed people, someone who could get out and promote the map collection, who could go give talks about the maps, who could take people on tours through the map vault and things like that. One of the reasons I was hired for that job. But yeah, definitely think about kind of how your personality fits into some of these roles. And some of that you'll discover as you're going through your coursework as well. But yeah, I always think about, introvert, extrovert, that will help you narrow down some of these opportunities that Dr. Glazer was just talking about as well.
I have to say, I think that's great advice. I love the introvert, extrovert. I also think there are lots of different kinds of people in this country, and there are lots of different cultures. And it's really important to be a person that's open to learning about other people and other cultures. Not every culture in this country does things the same way, or I personally wouldn't know if I was going into a community, a Hmong community or Korean community. I wouldn't know what the most important artifacts are, the most important ceremonies are. but I know how to find out. And so I think curiosity is important. I think an openness to other people and other cultures that are not yours is really important in public history, and a willingness to learn and listen as opposed to talking. I also think internships are essential. That you really need to find good internships where you have substantial projects, not Xeroxing and office assistant, but you're really getting to do the public history work. Those are really key.
And most programs are going to require an internship. Well, I believe so. Almost every single one does. And I always tell my students, to kind of think about it like when you're looking for a job, right? We have places I can place people, but I also like my students to, find internships that suit them, that work with them, that aren't a huge commute for them. I know the industry is working, or the field, museums, etc. Not a lot of places. I'm in rural East Texas. I've had one of my students received a paid internship, right? The rest of them are unpaid. We're trying to get away from that. Sometimes it's not always feasible with the institutions, but definitely, working with your advisors to find a good fit for an internship for you. That, what Dr. Sloan was saying, gives you great experience to build a portfolio for when you get out on the job market.
Just to add to all of that, I agree with all of that. And I would just add that one of the things, especially I think because we're online, that distinguishes students who do really well is kind of what Dr. Glazer was talking about, some self-direction and initiative on the part of the student to really take advantage of the opportunities. I often tell our students that, we'll line up opportunities for you to go to a conference, to do an internship, to do a project as part of a class that could then spiral into something more for you. Those sorts of things are opportunities we try to line up all the time. And we love when students take advantage of the opportunities to do those things, but that requires a step on the part of the student in the program. And I think is a difference between undergrad, where there tends to be a lot more kind of aid and support and help coming directly from the faculty member. At this point, you're beginning to train to go out and hopefully work in a museum or work in historic preservation. And I love to see students who are taking that initiative, finding those opportunities, as Dr. Glazer was saying, to grow as they are still students in the program. And I think that also benefits you significantly once you get out into the world of public history itself, where you're going to need to be finding projects and seeking grant opportunities and really taking the lead on those kinds of things. I love to see that out of students at the graduate level, because I think that's an important kind of hard to train skill set. We can teach you a lot about how to do good public history work. We can teach you a lot about how to work with communities and how to work in a particular setting. But the ability to kind of put yourself out there and come up with projects and initiate those ideas is a really important component of a graduate education, and a really important component of a successful kind of career in the field.
And simply networking, going to conferences like NCPH and talking to people just in terms of the kinds of for informational interviews, but also, making those connections. Yeah.
I was going to say, get to know the faculty in your program too.
Yeah.
We're here to support you. And, Dr. Glazer and I went to the same institution. We're connected through faculty that we both had and through an alumni network there, which is wonderful. But we also developed relationships with those faculty while we were in the program. Those faculty then became our strong advocates when we went out looking for work, and when we, in our cases, went into the university system. That's a really important thing too. It's not just going to class and doing the assignments, but it's building those relationships. And those things will benefit you long after you are out of a program. You will see faculty 10 years later and reconnect, and those things are really important.
And to add on to that, how I got my public history job is the institution that was looking actually contacted the history department where I was getting my PhD, saying, hey, we have this job opportunity coming up. Do you have any students that you think would be a good fit for this? And I found out a couple of faculty had sent my name down before I even had applied, which was wonderful. And then I ended up meeting the guy who would end up being my big boss at a conference like a week or two after I'd applied for the job. So networking is super important. And it does work both ways, both with faculty and with institutions, because there are a lot of local organizations, historical organizations. In my case, it's Texas Map Society, that have these kind of overlapping folks that I think, kind of to get back to our very first question about the difference between public history and regular history, is a lot of public history organizations are really interdisciplinary. And so there's a lot of trained historians, not right. So it's a really great networking opportunity that students and practitioners really benefit from.
Thank you everyone for that. I think I'm just gonna pump the brakes very quickly in case anyone's like, I don't know if I even want to do a public history program. So if there are resources that you're looking for, I'm going to throw a few in the chat from NCPH. One includes the updated graduate student handbook, which my committee worked on. And so that was really the product of looking at the 2015 graduate student navigator, and thinking about us as current students and new professionals that are facing new challenges with, the current moment and funding and things like that. So that was something that we worked together to talk about, like, what do grad students need to know looking for a program, going to conferences, applying for jobs, things like that. And these are also things that we talked a little bit about with some of the networking. And I will also go ahead and throw in NCPH's program guide. So if you're like, this is great that I'm hearing from 4 different programs today, but I don't live in any of these places, or I want to go somewhere completely different. This is a good guide to kind of check in and see for specific regional places, for different types of specialties, and different types of degrees as well. So just wanted to throw those in there. I think we kind of already talked about some good advice for ways students can start thinking about which programs they're interested in. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next question. All right. I have up next, what kinds of jobs are available for public historians? And would these be different for a master's as opposed to a PhD?
I'll start us off. Sure. I mean, this is always a big question, right? And the focuses of your program are going to affect to a certain extent the opportunities that are available to you. Public historians, because there are a lot of programs are a little broader and more generalist, are not necessarily scoping use directly into museums or directly into historic preservation, although there are certainly some that do that. But public historians work in those kinds of spaces. They work in archives. They work as community historians and providing tours and doing living history, doing education work in kind of public settings. So there's a lot of different places where public historians can fit in, and where the skills that you're going to learn in most public history programs can be really beneficial to you. As far as the MA versus the PhD, I generally, on a personal level, I generally recommend that students who want to go and work in the field stop at the MA, and go and at least get some experience before maybe they consider coming back to get a PhD, only because you don't want to end up in a position that, quite frankly, I actually ended up in to a certain extent, where you have that highest level of degree, that PhD, but you don't have necessarily a lot of experience working in the field, and you find yourself kind of overeducated but underqualified in terms of the experience that you need for the positions that might require you to have a PhD that are out there. So there are positions outside of academia where a PhD is really beneficial, but I think it's also advisable to go and get some experience working in the field first before you necessarily consider pursuing that, unless you're crazy and you really want to work in academia, in which case a PhD is actually required. But we can talk more about that. That's a whole different issue.
I would agree with Will on all of that. But I would say that the reason that I got my PhD, I did not intend on being a professor. But what I kind of saw happening was that master's degrees were often this is completely not blanket truth in all cases, but that often there was a PhD as the primary investigator on a lot of type projects or expert witness work or something like that. So felt the PhD would give me the clout to be a primary investigator on whatever project. And then this, the academia just kind of that was the opportunity that I took and the situation that I was at. So, and then everything else well said.
Well, I think my program focuses on museum work, and most of the people that come here have a real interest in working either in history museums, but we also have a science program. So some people work in science, natural history, or science centers, but also the people that are interested in history can work in historic houses, battlefields. There's so many. The vast majority of museums in the United States are history museums of one sort or another. They may be anthropology museums, they may be battlefields, they may be historic houses or historic sites, but the vast majority are museums. Within the museum, there are subfields. So you might work in museum education, you might work in museum exhibition, you might be a collections manager, or you might be a curator. So there are subfields that we plan for. But we're also seeing a lot of students taking jobs in development and fundraising, and which makes you an extremely versatile person. It also makes you a much higher paid person. But well, it's true. Development as we go forward is going to be, I think, even more in demand. But also, many of our students also work in other not-for-profits. They may move back and forth. So I feel like I'm banging on the transferable skills, but many of those skills, using evidence and the skills that public historians use, can be transferred to other not-for-profits. So we have students that work for theater companies, that work for dance companies, that work for other cultural organizations, and other arts organizations. So that's also something to keep in mind when you're looking at public history programs, is thinking about transferable skills and what are the places you can work, because you don't know where you're going to end up. You never know where you're going to end up living, or where your partner, if you have a partner, might move to take a position, and you'll want to find a job there.
That is a fantastic point. Some of our students have gone on to also theaters, or one is working with the American Bar Association in the Virgin Islands now. Another one took over Habitat for Humanity and just started getting into that kind of nonprofit work with their public history degree. So that
you could work for
great.
corporations. There are corporate histories or corporate
Yep.
archives. We have a student who works for Harley. We have two students who work for Harley Davidson.
My first job was the utility in the archives. Yeah.
Yes.
Local utility. Yeah.
Yeah, we have students who are going into law school off of their master's degree. We have a student who was just recently admitted they started doing oral history work in hospice care and then got admitted into a palliative care program for a PhD. So I mean, it really does, to all these points, open up all sorts of interesting doors. Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then I came to public history kind of backwards from you, Will. So I was traditional, history PhD, MA PhD, and it was actually my PhD skills, research, and my background in historical cartography that got me a public history job with maps, which then in turn gave me the public history experience to put me into this role, teaching public history and working with the next generation of public historians. So it can be that two-way street, and like Dr. Shoren was saying, it is a lot of transferable skills inherent in the history degree, but also in public history. And some of our students have gone on to work in education in historic homes. I have several of my students who were able to get full-time jobs at the places they interned, which, so again, just to kind of talk about the importance of internships. But down at the TSLAC, which is the Texas State Archives and Libraries Commission, historical parks in Dallas and things like that. So they've got a broad range of jobs that you could get as well.
All right, thank you. I am going to go ahead and move on, and I'm wondering if we could do this in just like a few sentences, but our next question is, what are your program's requirements in terms of required classes, internships, and a capstone project? And then going off of that, what does a typical week look like for public history grad students in your program or maybe in your own experience?
I would say something that undergraduates I think are sometimes surprised by if they haven't been looking into it is at least full-time for us is 3 classes, and they're usually once a week classes as opposed to the 5 or 6 that you might take as an undergraduate. And then we have some core classes that all our master students take, traditional and public history. We also require our public historians to take a couple traditional graduate seminars, and then also 2 public history type practicums. Everybody has to take a seminar with us to kind of get everybody, the cohort together and cover kind of big issues in public history that maybe aren't covered by those more specific practicum type classes. And then a couple of electives, internship and capstone.
So for our program, we have 5 core classes that students take: a public history seminar, which is a foundational course, kind of foundational literature in public history, a methods class that focuses on doing local and community-based history work, an internship, digital history, because we consider that to be an important kind of direction in the field that everyone needs to be trained in, and then what we call America Interpreted, which is our introduction to kind of historiography and working as an historian. And I think a lot of your academic programs in public history are going to be balancing training you to be a public historian with also training you to be a historian. And you're going to see that, I think, in a lot of our curriculum. So then beyond our core, students can take electives in public history and things like historic preservation or museums and material culture or oral history, as well as a few electives in either US or non-US history, and then finish with either a thesis or a capstone project based in their community where they put their skills to work and then kind of defend that work to a committee at the end of their time in the program. That's how we're structured.
And because of that, that kind of dual training, I try to tell them that a master's degree might, like at least in our department, is a quicker degree than the public history. The public history takes, is a few more credits, and that's because of this kind of extra public facing kind of skills work.
Yeah, our public history program right now is 6 more credits than our non-public history program because we have to try to train you to do both things. But to Dr. Glazer's point earlier too, as far as like the typical week in our program goes, it's readings and discussion most weeks with usually some project work attached to it. We try in our program to incorporate applied projects into almost every class. Sometimes those are group things in collaboration with a partner that we've identified, and sometimes those are independent things that the students work on themselves. But regardless, there's some kind of real world application of ideas that we try to incorporate into a lot of our courses. And so usually it's a balance of readings and discussion with work on real world application components too.
My program has 5 core courses. These all sound somewhat similar. Everyone takes an introduction course, and because we're a generalist program, everyone takes museum education. They take museum administration, collections care and management, and a course that's been at CGP since the very beginning, research and fieldwork. And after the core, students are required to take 2 research course capstones, and then the rest of the courses are elective. Courses meet once a week. And I say it's a very frenetic place because students spend as much time in the field as they do in the classroom. And we focus on experiential learning. And so students are out and about in the community. During the second year, you can also there's a summer internship between the first and second year. And in the second year, you can also do internships during the semester as an elective.
And so our program, because it's a certificate program, so we have the full MA that you can do, but in the certificate itself, we've required to take the Introduction to Public History, which is a broad overview of what public history is and what are all the stuff we've already been talking about today. And then the other required class is the internship, because we want our folks that are coming out with the certificate to have that practical experience. And then your other classes, we have a menu you can choose from depending on what's in rotation. We have material culture class, digital history, oral history, and then we have a special topics that rotates. I believe the next one is probably going to be national parks and monuments. So it'll be a course that, and like everyone else said, like a lot of graduate classes, they meet once a week with the exception of our intro, because that is also a undergraduate split. So we meet twice a week so that the undergrad students aren't terrified by a 3-hour class. And but yeah, again, lots of reading, weekly meetings, and then especially in the core classes, then you will be getting a lot of hands-on stuff. And we're hoping for students to build that portfolio with digital projects, physical projects. My class right now, we were just in a local museum last night, looking at the stuff that they're going to curate for an exhibit in the museum in our next town over. So sometimes we're in the room, sometimes we're out in the field.
All right, thank you, everyone. We are getting a lot of questions in the chat, which is exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and pivot to those. And so first up, I have a question from Sophia, who asks, would you recommend going directly from undergrad into a public history master's program, or is it better to try and get relevant work experience first? And I think we touched on this a little bit, but if anyone else has a little bit more advice in that vein, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I always get nervous when they go straight in, because I feel like those who have had a little bit experience are more motivated and understand why they're there, and what they want and what they don't want out of the degree. So, just one or 2 years. I know people are afraid of losing momentum and things like that, but I think it is a good idea to have that experience, as Will mentioned earlier, before entering the master's. Not completely necessary. I have plenty of students who come straight in and do great, but
Yeah, I think there are pros and cons to both. You don't want to kind of get out of the routine of going to school and worry about kind of coming back and having to remember how to write papers and get, do a lot of reading and all of that. I will say the nature of our program, with it being online, we actually get a lot of students that are like don't see this as a one or the other thing. So we get students a sizable chunk of our students who are working or are part-time in a museum and are pursuing their education simultaneously, taking one class at a time, being able to take classes in the evenings and that sort of thing, because they're trying to balance kind of both. And that ends up being really beneficial for a lot of them, because they're getting 3 or 4 years of experience if they're taking one class at a time, while they are also working their way through a program. So sometimes in some situations, you can also do a little bit of each and continue to gain experience. I mean, one of the unfortunate things about the job market in public history, and this has been true all the way back in our day when we were going and pursuing our degrees, is that public history positions often require you to have a substantial amount of experience and the degree. And getting as much experience as you can before you get that degree is I think really important. So if you have the opportunity to work for kind of a local museum for a couple years and gain more of that experience, that's definitely a good idea.
All right. If no one has anything else to add, I think we're just going to keep going
I'm going to add something.
Oh, Gretchen. Okay, perfect.
I always hesitate to add this because I'm the person that went immediately from undergrad into grad school, and I'm really glad that I did. So I'm always sympathetic when people say, well, I don't want to take a year off. And I think it depends on the maturity of the person. I think it depends on each individual. Yes, it's great when you can bring some experience to the table, but not everybody can afford to work in an unpaid internship, say, for a year to get that experience. So find a graduate program that gives you that experience. Find a graduate program that has terrific internships, that has those opportunities, so that while you're in graduate school, you can gain that public history experience. Yeah, Stephanie said that she wishes she had waited a year, which I think is great, but she did a great job in graduate school anyway. So I do think not everybody can spend the time. And if you can't, I would say go for it, go straight through.
Yeah, as someone else who went straight through, I tell students, if you want to take the year off, for me, I needed to keep that momentum and I needed to keep going through. It's also a question of funding, right? Always, and we haven't really talked about funding. I think it's maybe a question that's coming up later. But sometimes, do you have the funds to step away or not, or can you continue with financial aid or scholarships and that sort of thing and going straight through? So funding is always a thing to think about. For me, I needed to keep going because I had the funding to continue and keep going straight through. And also I think you have to know yourself. I think if I had stepped away before starting grad school, I don't know if I would be here. I don't know. Because I needed to kind of keep in that lane while I was in it. But that's, again, know how you work, for sure.
Yeah, and full disclosure, I went straight through too. I just, if you're going to go straight through, be mindful of how you're getting your experience as you move through, and really, as Dr. Soren was saying, make sure that you're getting that experience in the program, through the classes, through your internship, through your GA-ship. Whatever ways you can get it. You ideally want to come out with a couple to 3 years worth of cumulative experience. If it's just an internship and that's the only thing you've ever done, you're not setting yourself up well. So you want to make sure you have some robust experience coming out, however you get to that point.
I took 2 years off after undergraduate, and then I took a semester off between master's and PhD because I just needed that. I needed that mental break. But I also acquired some skills, during that time that weren't even really, sort of related to public history. I was going to add marketing as one of those places to get into museum work, and graphic design at the time kind of lent itself to public history. But a lot of our students do part-time because they need to keep making some money. And that's what's nice about all our grad classes are 4:30 to 7. So they can usually have the days to work.
I know Alex posted a bit of a interesting opposite question, is how they phrased it. What would be recommended for someone who has around a decade of work history in public history already? And would there be an advantage to getting a master's? And if so, what type of program would you recommend? So a little different than what we were just talking about with trying to build up some work experience before getting to a program.
I mean, I think it depends, obviously experience can often substitute for the education, but sometimes there's a lot that people have to learn kind of the hard way on the on the ground, and that the kind of freedom of sitting in a classroom and discussing scenarios and just best practices can be really helpful and allow somebody to do their job a little more efficiently.
And I mean, you will sometimes run into places where that degree becomes important for moving up. Not always. Sometimes you can make an argument that your experience outweighs the need for the degree. But I would still argue at the same time, there are places where having that more advanced degree is going to open up doors, especially if you want to move into kind of more administrative capacities within a museum. You want to become a museum director down the road. Not that you can't do that without the master's degree, but those doors will open up more if you do pursue an MA.
And I hate to say this because I don't have one, but I think an all online program is perfect if you if you have that level of experience, and depending on where you live, being able to continue to work and still go to school, an online program makes perfect sense, it seems to me.
I wasn't going to say it because that's what our program does.
I know.
that is half to 2/3 of our students are like that. We have students that are coming straight out, but we also have students that have, I've worked in a museum for 5 years and I'm ready to pursue a more advanced degree. And we're set up for that.
We've also had a couple of our certificate students be people that are already in the field and just need some sort of certification that they can put on their resume, and again, they kind of like coming back to the cloud. We're all hands-on. All of the our public history classes are our only ones that are not a hybrid format, just because of the hands-on stuff that we do. But yeah, so we have had folks in the field already who are coming back just because they would like to get a certification, and generally it was because they needed to show something along those lines for promotion, for that sort of thing.
And I'll just add to Will's point that in the new professional and student committee, even though people sometimes typically associate those groups with people who are on the younger side, we really try in the committee to not, think about an age or a stage of life like associated with that. You can be a new professional at any point in your life. You can be a student at any point in your life. So I just wanted to throw that out there before we move on to the other questions, because I know we're getting a little close to time. So other questions that were put in the chat. How important are GRE scores for graduate programs when you have 2+ years of practical experience in the field? David wants to know.
My program we don't take GRE scores. It's part of the admissions.
We don't take them either.
No, neither do we.
Yeah, I think a lot of programs have moved to abolish GRE scores because they don't really give us a lot of information to begin with. So it's going to vary. Really, I mean, if a program requires it, then it might matter somewhat, but a lot of programs don't require that anymore.
All right, perfect. Moving right along, Julia is curious what preparation in terms of undergrad coursework and work experiences do you recommend for a successful public history master applicant?
If your undergraduate has some kind of public history focus or minor, it's a good idea. The way we've kind of designed our minor is to expose students to just here's the field, so you kind of know what you're getting into and you know what to look for when you're applying for a master's degree, because you've already been exposed to it. So if there's any kind of public history focus, if there's not, just under the public history umbrella, like archaeology classes or art curatorship classes or art history classes, or kind of public history adjacent classes as well. Just give you a little bit more of an idea.
I agree. Go for
Sorry.
it.
Oh, thanks. I also think writing is really important in what we do. If you're not writing exhibition labels, you're writing grant proposals. There's so many kinds. You're writing letters. There's so many kinds of writing that are required in public history that it's a great idea to take some writing courses, creative writing, have some English grammar under your English grammar courses under your belt. Writing is just being a good writer and a persuasive writer is really important in public history.
And I would say if your program doesn't have a minor or even any classwork necessarily, like where you can just take a one-off class in public history, which some programs will have, also look around in your community and think about, a museum on campus or an archive. Most universities have like a special collections and archives. Think about local museums in your community where you might be able to spend some time. We have a lot of undergraduate students who get like work study opportunities at local museums or volunteer if that's something they can handle in their capacity. We have other students who get on-campus positions working at like our campus archives and special collections. And they're 5 hours a week. It's not necessarily a ton of work, but it's a little bit of something. Starts giving you a little experience, starts helping you familiarize yourself with the field, and it looks great on a resume when you're applying to a grad program.
And if one of the conferences are near you, then like go to the conferences.
And I would also add for undergraduate work, this is some stuff that I advise a lot of our undergraduates for history anyway, is anything that's going to give you some sort of cultural knowledge, right? Cultural knowledge, I mean by like, I take a gender studies class, take an African American studies class, take a Latin American studies or something like that, that helps you understand other cultural groups. That is also going to really help you, not only in your history degree and in graduate studies, but in public history as well.
Yeah, even in our public history minor, we require a survey of Latino history or African American history or something like that. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, we have 2 other questions that had been asked in the chat previously. Jack is curious, would you recommend working in the field first, even if the end goal is to teach primarily?
I mean, that's what I did. That was my role. Like I said earlier, my goal wasn't initially to be in public history. And then I ended up getting into public history, which got me back into teaching. So I've done both. Yeah, I think your education is never wasted, right? I always look at it that way. Whether you go into teaching or you are working in a public history institution, I don't think that education is ever wasted regardless. There's a lot of, transferable skills keeps coming up, interdisciplinary stuff. I don't think starting one and going to the other or going back and forth, that education will never be wasted.
I think it depends on what you're teaching too, because I had no intention of I wouldn't have become a professor in a university if I wasn't teaching public history. I just had that was where my interest was, and so I had a little, I had some experience, and so having that experience is really essential for teaching public history. At the same time, if you want to teach, sort of more traditionally, there's a lot of, again, transferable skills in terms of place-based learning and material culture that can also help in the classroom.
As somebody who went into my graduate program telling everybody that under no circumstances would I ever be a university professor, I can fully understand that. I think getting experience in the field has helped me. I was a museum director for 5 years. I responded to a board. I did a budget. I did grant writing. I had to run public programs and work with community members and like a very intensive level. I had to manage staff, do all of those things, and I routinely call back on that experience in my classroom as something that I can refer to as like practical examples I can bring in at the class to connect students to. And I think it also makes me a better educator because, we can read books about doing this work all day, but there's really nothing that can replace actually doing the work. And so having spent years in the field, both when I was in graduate school and after graduate school, but before I became a faculty member, I think is really important to kind of my ability to be an educator successfully to students. I have that practical experience to lean back on and refer to when I'm working with them.
You hear high school kids say all the time, history is boring, and it really isn't. And I think that public historians teach history differently. So if you have that experience of practicing public history, of having gone out and do that, I think it will make you a better teacher, and a more interesting teacher, and your history won't be boring. So that would be my advice, that yes, it's great to get that practice in because it'll make you a better teacher, I think.
Okay.
All right, perfect. We have one last question from Anonymous. I have had an interest in public history, but I've also recently fallen in love with anthropology. Is it common to have graduate programs that focus on both, and/or what ways could I combine those interests in a future graduate program?
Just 2 years ago, we added a cultural resource management certificate to as something you could get with your public history degree, and that is not wholeheartedly anthropology based, but our pitch is that with the public history degree and the CRM certificate, you can go above and below ground. You can do CRM work, and so. And that works for us because we don't have an MA in anthropology, and that allows those interested in anthropology to get that master's degree and still do that kind of work.
I would say look for a CRM focused public history program. That's where you're going to find a niche that'll support that anthropology component primarily.
All right, perfect. I think if no one has anything else to add, I can't believe we're like exactly on time. This is great. I just want to put out thank you so much for everyone who was able to speak, and then everyone else who came and attended and submitted all of your great questions. I'm sure I speak for other folks that if you have any other questions or you want to connect with us, please feel free to do so. I'm sure everyone has their university emails on a website, and then I'm also on LinkedIn as well. So thank you guys so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Eleanor.
Thank you all.
Yeah,
Thanks,
of
Eleanor.
course.
Good to see everybody.
Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you at the next session. All right. Have a great afternoon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.